In this first lecture, I'll explain what science-based medicine is, why it's important, and how it's different from evidence-based medicine. In the second lecture, I'll talk about medicine that isn't based on science, complementary and alternative medicine, or CAM. In lectures 3 through 8, I'll cover individual topics in CAM that claim to be science-based but that are not: chiropractic, acupuncture, homeopathy, naturopathy, energy medicine, and miscellaneous others. In lecture 9, I'll talk about some of the pitfalls in clinical research, why we can't take every published study at face value, and how to tell if a study is good science. And in the final lecture, I'll talk about how science-based medicine is misunderstood in the media and in politics. I've prepared a course guide to accompany these lectures. It summarizes the important information from each lecture and includes references and suggestions for further reading. Now, the subject of these lectures is science-based medicine, not CAM, so why devote so much time to discussing CAM? Well, there's method in my madness. There are 2 reasons to concentrate on CAM. First, I think that understanding what good science isn't is the best way to understand what good science is. Most of what I've learned about what constitutes a good scientific study, I learned by studying the flaws in a lot of very bad studies. Bad examples can be very educational. If you haven't learned to spot what's wrong in flawed science, how could you ever be sure that something is good science and doesn't have any of those flaws? Have you ever read books about neurologic abnormalities like Oliver Sacks' book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat? When part of the brain is damaged by a stroke or a tumor or trauma, strange things happen, abnormal behavior and loss of certain abilities that we take for granted. Those abnormalities are clues to understanding how that part of the brain normally works. Studying brain pathology helps us understand normal brain function. And the principle of learning about the good by studying the bad works for almost anything. For instance, if you wanted to learn how to apply makeup, it would be helpful to see examples of people who've used too much makeup or the wrong kind. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that much of CAM falsely claims to be based on science, and we need to understand why mainstream science rejects those claims. Jenny McCarthy says, vaccines cause autism. Her autistic son Evan is all the evidence she needs. She says, my science is Evan and he's at home. That's my science. But we can easily dismiss claims like that. As Christopher Hitchens famously said, assertions made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. But it's not so easy to dismiss a homeopath who shows us his evidence in the form of a long list of published peer-reviewed scientific studies that he thinks have validated homeopathy. We need to understand why his evidence doesn't stand up to scrutiny. By the end of this course, when you encounter someone who's promoting homeopathy or maybe selling a miracle diet supplement through multi-level marketing, if he throws a scientific study at you and says, here's proof that it works, you'll know why his proof is no such thing, and you'll have a rational basis for rejecting his claims. Now, science is a wonderful thing. It has improved our lives, it's lengthened our lifespans, and it's given us reliable tools to understand how the world works. But for most of human history, we had to make do without science. Evolution shaped our ancestors' brains to help them survive in a world without science, a world without newspapers, books, or the internet, without even written language. They had only 2 ways of learning about the world: their own experiences and the experiences of others. If you ate an unfamiliar berry and got sick, you'd learn not to eat those berries, if you survived. Or a friend might tell you not to eat them because they made him sick, and you might be able to profit from his experience. Sometimes what your friend told you might be wrong, but in general, paying attention to the stories of your friends was likely to help you survive. To survive as hunter-gatherers on the African savannah, our ancestors needed to learn from stories, and they also needed to make fast decisions. So they evolved to be very good at pattern recognition and at jumping to conclusions. Have you ever thought you saw an animal and then taken a closer look and realized you'd been fooled by a stump or a rock or something? The other day I thought I saw a dead bird out on our deck, but it turned out to be just a crumpled brown leaf. We look for recognizable patterns, but we can be fooled by objects that have a similar profile. Now, let's say you're one of our ancestors on the savannah. You see something over there off in the distance, in the bushes, and it looks sort of lion-shaped, but it might just be an illusion created by branches and shadows. If you see the pattern as a lion and you're wrong, you run away when you didn't need to, but there's no real harm done. On the other hand, if you miss a real lion, your mistake could be fatal. Richard Wiseman explained, the ability to find patterns is so important to your survival that your brain would rather see a few imaginary patterns than miss genuine instances of cause and effect. That's the price you pay for being so amazing the rest of the time. But we see imaginary patterns everywhere. For instance, a baseball player notices that he was wearing a certain pair of socks when his team won, so he develops a superstition and he keeps wearing his lucky socks. His team doesn't always win when he wears those socks, but it wins often enough to reinforce his superstitious belief. Evolution shaped our thinking processes for maximum survival advantage, but it was a mixed blessing. There were advantages to our skills, but there were also downsides. We got very good at pattern recognition, and that helped us make sense of our environment. It helped us identify threats like a lion in the bushes, and it helped us learn the effects of poisonous plants or medicinal plants. But it gave us a tendency to sometimes see patterns that aren't real, and to develop superstitious beliefs about cause and effect. We got very good at making quick decisions. This allowed us to react in time, to run away from the lion now, instead of stopping to think about it. But it made us more likely to jump to conclusions before we had all the evidence. Evolution equipped us with emotions that were very handy for survival. Fear motivated us to run away from the lion fast, but emotions can interfere with judgment. For instance, the fear of death can lead cancer patients to grasp at straws and go to Mexico to try implausible, potentially dangerous treatments like Laetrile. Morgan Levy said, thinking like a human is not a logical way to think, but it is not a stupid way to think either. You could say that our thinking is intelligently illogical. Millions of years of evolution did not result in humans that think like a computer. It is precisely because we think in an intelligently illogical way that our predecessors were able to survive. So evolution equipped us with minds that kept us alive in a pre-scientific world by a strategy of paying attention to what others told us, of seeing patterns that might not always be real, and of jumping to conclusions. Then we discovered science, and what used to be a survival advantage became a handicap. The scientific method is a marvelous set of tools that allows us to ask specific questions about how the world works and to get reliable answers. And science is a way of correcting for the kinds of mistakes our minds are prone to make. But our minds evolved to help us survive in a world without science, and thinking in a scientific way doesn't come naturally. Our minds still work the old way. We prefer stories to studies. We prefer anecdotes to analyses. If our neighbor had a bad experience with a Toyota, we're likely to remember his complaints and not buy a Toyota even if Consumer Reports tells us that their test found that it was the most reliable brand. It isn't logical to value hearsay over data, but we're just doing what comes naturally. It takes a lot of training and discipline to overcome our natural tendencies. How do we decide if a medical treatment works? We're impressed by anecdotes and we jump to conclusions based on our observations. If your friend says, homeopathy worked for me, you want to try it. When you try it and your symptoms go away, it's only natural to assume that it really works. But sometimes we get it wrong. Your symptoms might have gone away for other reasons that had nothing to do with the treatment. You have no way of knowing whether your symptoms might have gone away if you hadn't used any treatment at all. Assumptions can be wrong. We make mistakes, and no matter how smart we are, every one of us can be fooled. Patients and doctors alike were fooled for centuries by bloodletting. Everybody knew that it worked. The medical textbooks explained how it worked to balance the humors, and everyone knew it saved lives because they'd seen it with their own eyes. But when someone finally thought to compare patients treated with and without bloodletting, they discovered they'd been killing more patients than they helped. Big oops. Even modern doctors can be fooled. Not long ago, doctors used to do an operation for heart disease where they opened the chest and tied off chest wall arteries to divert more blood flow to the heart. They had an impressive 90% success rate. A doctor named Leonard Cobb was skeptical, so he did an experiment with a sham surgery control group where he just made the incision in the chest and closed it back up without actually doing anything inside. He discovered that just as many patients improved after the fake surgery. In this diagram, the two bars on the left show that chest pain improved almost as much with the sham surgery, light blue, as with the real surgery, dark blue. And the two bars on the right show that the sham surgery, light blue, reduced the need for nitroglycerin pills for pain even more than the real surgery. The differences were in opposite directions, and they weren't statistically significant. Essentially, the fake surgery worked the same as the real surgery. So they thought they had this great operation with a 90% success rate, but they were wrong. When they put it to a scientific test, it turned out the operation accomplished nothing at all, except maybe to suggest to patients that they would feel better. So this was another big oops, and doctors stopped doing that operation. There are a whole lot of reasons people can come to believe an ineffective treatment works. Here are some of them. Don't bother trying to read them all now. I'm going to go over each one of them separately. 1. The disease may have run its natural course. A lot of diseases are self-limiting. The body's natural healing processes restore people to health after a time. Wounds heal. A cold goes away in a week, whether you treat it or not. A few years ago, I developed shoulder pain. I was unable to raise my arm without pain, and I couldn't reach behind my back to fasten my bra. After about a year, one day I suddenly realized I was back to full function and had no pain at all. My treatment? Nothing but tincture of time. Whatever was wrong had run its natural course and resolved on its own. If I'd been using any treatment at the time, I would have been fooled into thinking that the treatment had worked. Even serious life-threatening diseases can sometimes resolve without treatment. Before we had antibiotics to treat pneumonia, it wasn't always fatal. Some people survived, so before we could be sure antibiotics worked, we had to compare the survival rate with and without antibiotics. 2. Many diseases are cyclical. The symptoms of any disease fluctuate over time. Fevers go up and down. People with arthritis have bad days and good days. The pain gets worse for a while, then it gets better for a while. If you use a remedy when the pain is particularly bad, it was probably about ready to start getting better anyway, so the remedy gets credit it doesn't deserve. That's known as regression to the mean. Here's what happens. Sarah has osteoarthritis pain in her knees. Here's the natural course of her pain during a random month. The first few days of this particular month, she has little or no pain. As the middle of the month approaches, her pain gets progressively worse, and then towards the end of the month, it subsides. Now, this is without any treatment. She's not likely to take any pain pills at the beginning of the month when the pain is minimal, but by the middle of the month, she needs relief, so she starts taking pills. And look what happens. As she takes those pills, the pain subsides. It's only natural for her to assume that the pills worked. But she doesn't know that she's only looking at the right side of this graph with the left side cut off. Her pain did exactly what it would have done if she hadn't taken any pills, but she doesn't have any way of knowing that. 3. We're all suggestible. Studies show that we think wine tastes better if it comes from the bottle with a higher price label. If we're told something is going to hurt, it's more likely to hurt. If we're told something is going to make it better, it probably will. We all know this. That's why we kiss our children's owies. Anything that distracts us from thinking about our symptoms is likely to help. 4. The wrong treatment may get the credit. If you took megadoses of vitamins along with your chemotherapy, you may think it was the vitamins that cured your cancer when it was really the surgery and the chemo. Sometimes the credit is due to something you don't even realize. Maybe something changed in your life at the same time. One writer called this the spaghetti factor. You happened to change brands of spaghetti sauce at about the same time, and it was some herb in the new brand that caused the improvement. 5. The diagnosis may be wrong. You've all heard those claims that X cured my cancer. When you track down the details of those miracle cancer cures, quite often it turns out that they never even had a biopsy, so we can't know if they ever really had a cancer cure. Even if they had a biopsy, the results could have been wrong. Pathologists have been known to make mistakes in reading the slides, and there could have been a mix-up in the lab where the sample was actually from another patient. The prognosis may be wrong. They said I only had 6 months to live, but thanks to treatment X, I'm still alive 3 years later. But doctors can only provide an educated guess about the future, and they may have guessed wrong. All doctors really knew was that the median life expectancy for that condition was 6 months. But that means half of the patients die before 6 months, and half of them live longer than 6 months, sometimes much longer. 6. Temporary mood improvement may be mistaken for a cure. If a practitioner makes you feel optimistic and hopeful, you may think you feel better when the disease is really unchanged. 7. Psychological needs affect behavior and perceptions. When people want to believe badly enough, they can convince themselves that they've been helped. If they've invested time and money, they don't want to admit that it was wasted. We see what we want to see. We may not remember accurately what symptoms we had when. We remember things the way we wish they had happened. When a doctor is sincerely trying to help a patient, the patient feels a sort of social obligation to please the doctor by getting better. And he may convince himself that he's better when he really isn't. People have been known to deny the facts, even to refuse to see that the tumor is still getting visibly bigger. In one case, a patient believed he was cured. His doctor said, "Look at the x-ray. The tumor's still there." And the patient refused to believe it. He insisted that that was just a shadow where the tumor used to be. 8. We confuse correlation with causation. Now this is a big one. Just because improvement follows a treatment, that doesn't necessarily mean that the treatment caused the improvement. It's called the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. That's Latin for after that, therefore because of that. The rooster crowed and then the sun came up. Therefore the rooster made the sun come up. Well, it's easy to see what's wrong with that reasoning. But look at this. I took a pill, I got better, therefore the pill made me better. When we take a pill and then we feel better, it seems compellingly obvious to us that it was the pill that made us feel better. And maybe it was the pill. But maybe it was just a mistake, like the rooster. We don't stop to think that we might have felt better for some other reason. We don't stop to rule out all other possible explanations. We jump to conclusions like the man who trained a flea to dance when it heard music, and then he cut the flea's legs off one by one until it stopped dancing. And then he concluded that the flea's organs of hearing must be in its legs. Correlation is not causation. People noticed that the number of autism diagnoses increased at about the same time the number of vaccines for infants increased. They saw a correlation and they assumed causation. Vaccines must cause autism. But there was also a correlation with the number of pirates. Science studied vaccines and autism, and they didn't find any evidence that vaccines caused autism. Science didn't study pirates to see if they caused autism. I love this graph. It shows an almost perfect correlation between autism diagnoses and sales of organic food. Does anyone think organic food causes autism? Correlation doesn't equal causation. To find out if a correlation really indicates a cause, a scientist named Hill came up with this list of criteria for determining causation. I'll illustrate with the example of smoking and lung cancer. There's no way we could do a randomized control study of smoking. You can't divide people into two groups and make one group smoke and the other not. You certainly couldn't have a blinded study because they would know whether they were smoking. So we had to approach the question by other routes. There was a temporal relationship. People smoked first and got lung cancer later. 2. There was a strong relationship. Lots more smokers than non-smokers got lung cancer. 3. There was a dose-response relationship. The more cigarettes smoked, the higher the rate of lung cancer. 4. The results of various kinds of studies were all consistent. 5. The mechanism was plausible. We know there are cancer-causing compounds in cigarette smoke. 6. Alternate explanations were considered and ruled out. 7. They did experiments where they exposed lab animals to cigarette smoke and the animals developed lung cancer. 8. Specificity. Cigarettes produce specific kinds of lung cancers. Coherence. The data from different kinds of epidemiologic and lab studies and from all sources of information held together in a coherent body of evidence. Richard Feynman said, "Science is what we've learned about how to keep from fooling ourselves." We fool ourselves because of the way our brains work. We prefer stories to studies, we have cognitive flaws and biases, we have perceptual failings, just think of optical illusions, and we're influenced by emotions and by psychological motivations. Biases and cognitive errors lead us to false conclusions that we wish to be true. Science is the only method that systematically controls for our biases and cognitive errors and allows us to obtain reliable information. The author of this book, a doctor named Druin Birch, has called it medicine's beautiful idea, the idea that no matter how certain we are that a treatment works, no matter how reasonable a belief sounds, we still have to test it. Today, EBM stands for evidence-based medicine, and it has been defined as the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients. But it wasn't until 1991 that the term evidence-based medicine first appeared in medical literature. Before that, we had other EBMs. First, there was expert-based medicine, where we unquestioningly accepted whatever the experts said. Aristotle said men had more teeth than women. He was the expert, and for centuries, everyone took his word for it. No one bothered to look in mouths and count teeth. And then there was experience-based medicine, where a doctor could say, "In my experience, this treatment has worked well for my patients." For centuries, doctors had experience with bloodletting to balance the humors, and they were thoroughly convinced that they were saving lives when they were actually killing patients. My colleague Mark Crislip says that the 3 most dangerous words in medicine are "in my experience," because experience is so very compelling, but is so very often wrong. So we learned to rely on scientific evidence rather than on expert opinion and experience. The first modern clinical trial was done by James Lind of the Royal Navy in 1747. Back then, sailing ships went out for years at a time, and sailors had no access to fresh foods. Sailors developed scurvy. They became weak, unable to work, and had internal bleeding, fever, jaundice, convulsions, bone pain, bleeding gums, their teeth fell out, and they died a painful death. Lind had heard reports of successful treatment with various remedies, and he decided to test them to find out if any of them really worked. He divided a group of 12 sick sailors into 6 groups. He gave each group a different test remedy: a quart of cider, 25 drops of elixir of vitriol. Now, that's sulfuric acid. I sure hope he diluted it in water before he gave it to them. 6 spoons of vinegar, half a pint of seawater, yuck, 2 oranges and a lemon, or a spicy paste plus a drink made from barley. The winner was, ta-da, 2 oranges and a lemon. Lind had shown that citrus fruit worked to cure scurvy, but he didn't have any idea how it worked. Today we know that scurvy is due to a deficiency of vitamin C, but vitamins wouldn't be discovered for another 2 centuries. Lind thought scurvy was caused by putrefaction, and he thought citrus fruits worked because the acid in the fruit prevented putrefaction. He tried sending ships out with bottled juice to save storage space, but that didn't work. The bottling process heated the juice and destroyed the vitamin C. So they had to go back to using fresh fruit. Anyway, the first clinical trial had found an effective treatment for scurvy. British sailors became known as limeys, and medical science was off and running. Some doctors still think that "in my experience" is better than evidence. Here's one. Jay Gordon, pediatrician to the stars. He caters to parents who want an excuse to delay or omit vaccinations. He says, "My very strong impression is that children with the fewest vaccines or no vaccines at all get sick less frequently and are healthier in general. I truly believe they also develop less autism." Well, his personal experience and uncontrolled observations have led him to false beliefs. Controlled scientific studies have proved that his beliefs are wrong, that he stubbornly prefers his own very strong impression to the scientific evidence. Evidence-based medicine was a great idea. Treat patients according to the evidence from scientific studies whenever possible. Unfortunately, the practice wasn't as good as the promise. We coined the term science-based medicine to point out the flaws in the way evidence-based medicine was being implemented. In 2008, a group of us skeptical doctors started the Science-Based Medicine blog under the leadership of Steven Novella. If you aren't familiar with the blog, I hope you'll check it out. It's www.sciencebasedmedicine.org. Science-based medicine is all one word. Here's the published hierarchy for evidence in evidence-based medicine. The quality of evidence increases as you climb the pyramid. The red bar near the top is the RCT. That's the gold standard of clinical science, the randomized controlled trial. It uses a placebo control and is double-blind. Typically, they compare an active drug to an inactive placebo, maybe a sugar pill. That's the gold standard of clinical science, the randomized controlled trial. Ideally, it uses a placebo control and is double-blind. Typically, they compare an active drug to an inactive placebo, maybe a sugar pill. The placebo is disguised so that it looks exactly like the active test drug. In a double-blind experiment, the patient doesn't know what he's getting, and the person giving him the pills doesn't know what he's giving. The pills are prepared by a third party who isn't otherwise involved in the research. They are coded, and the code isn't broken until the trial is finished. And the patients are randomly assigned to 2 equal groups to minimize any influence from other factors. The results are analyzed to determine if there is a statistically significant difference. Even the best RCTs are not definitive. There are a lot of things that can go wrong that could lead to false results. I'll be covering that in Lecture 9. We should never rely on the results of a single study. We should wait for confirmation by other studies. The lowest level on the pyramid is in vitro research. In vitro means in glass, like test tubes or petri dishes. You can kill cancer cells in the lab with practically anything, for instance a bleach or a blowtorch. But what happens to cells in a petri dish doesn't necessarily happen when they're part of a living body. And using a blowtorch on a patient wouldn't be a good idea. The next level is animal research, but the results of animal studies may not be applicable to humans. For instance, aspirin causes birth defects in mice, but it doesn't do that in humans. The next level is ideas, editorials, and opinions, which are basically speculation by people who may be more or less qualified to speculate. Then case reports, descriptions of a single patient. Then case series, reports of several patients with the same condition. Then case control studies, for example, where patients with lung cancer are compared to patients who don't have lung cancer to see whether there are more smokers in the lung cancer group. Then the cohort study, where groups of people are followed over time, for instance, groups of smokers and non-smokers, to see which group eventually develops more lung cancer. The EBM hierarchy puts the gold standard RCT near the top of the pyramid, but there's an even higher level. All too often, different RCTs get conflicting results. To break the tie, we can do a systematic review or a meta-analysis to combine information from several trials to reach a more accurate conclusion. They are the highest level of evidence, but they can only be as good as the individual studies, and sometimes they get false conclusions because of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. And one really well-designed large study can sometimes trump systematic reviews of lower quality studies. Evidence-based medicine rigorously limits itself to considering only the evidence, but something is missing from this pyramid. There is no place in this hierarchy for evidence from basic science, showing that a treatment is impossible or highly improbable. It doesn't give any consideration to prior plausibility. They tend to give equal credence to a study of a new antibiotic and a study of a homeopathic remedy. They don't seem to care that homeopathy is incompatible with our knowledge of physics, chemistry, and biology. They don't seem to understand that we would need far more evidence than a clinical study before we could accept that a homeopathic remedy was effective. It would require massive evidence sufficient to prove that all that other scientific knowledge was wrong. Now, we don't reject new ideas out of hand, but we do have to take prior plausibility into account. We have to require stronger evidence for things that are implausible. Carl Sagan said it best: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If I tell you I saw a robin in my backyard this morning, that's an ordinary claim. You'd probably accept a cell phone photo as evidence, or you might just take my word for it. But if I tell you I saw a fire-breathing dragon in my backyard, well, that's an extraordinary claim. And anyone with a shred of common sense would demand much more proof, not just a picture that might have been photoshopped, but something more substantial, like dragon scales or perhaps some dragon poop that could be analyzed for DNA. If a study shows that a slightly different new version of an old antibiotic works better for pneumonia, that requires an ordinary level of evidence. But if a study shows that standing on your head and whistling Dixie cures cancer, that would require a much higher level of evidence. Evidence-based medicine doesn't work well for CAM. It works on a one-tool-fits-all approach. Evidence-based medicine focuses on clinical trial results. It simply looks at the published clinical research and accepts the findings. And that works pretty well for conventional medicine, but it doesn't work well when you're dealing with things that lie outside the scientific paradigm, or when the scientific plausibility ranges from minuscule to non-existent. My colleague David Gorski said, "I suspect that the originators of evidence-based medicine never thought of the possibility of evidence-based medicine being applied to hypotheses as awe-inspiringly implausible as those of CAM. It simply never occurred to them. They probably assumed that any hypothesis that reaches a clinical trial stage must have good preclinical evidence and basic science evidence to support its efficacy. Science is a system of inquiry, not a collection of facts, and not a belief system. It's not just one single method, but a toolkit of methods to figure out how reality works. This diagram shows how the scientific process works. It starts with observations, and then a hypothesis is formed that might explain the observations. If the hypothesis is true, we should be able to use it to make accurate predictions. We test to see if it does. If we observe that the predictions are not accurate, we have to modify the hypothesis. If the hypothesis does allow us to make accurate predictions, then evidence eventually accumulates and theories can be formed. The word theory is very often misunderstood. In science, a theory doesn't mean a guess or an opinion. A scientific theory is an established body of knowledge like germ theory or the theory of evolution. Science is a disciplined process for testing hypotheses. It progresses slowly but inexorably as new discoveries build on old ones. It doesn't claim to have the truth. It reaches provisional conclusions based on the best available evidence, and it's always ready to change those conclusions if new, better evidence comes along. Studies are repeated, and they're either confirmed or discredited. A body of evidence gradually accumulates to the point that experts in the field can reach a consensus. Science makes mistakes, but a self-correcting system is in place. It's a collaborative effort. Studies are peer-reviewed, and scientists scrutinize each other's work. Science can be relied on to give us knowledge that works, and it can be used to make accurate predictions and to guide medical treatment. By the way, there's no such thing as Western science. There's only one science, and it's the same everywhere in the world. Some people would have us believe that there are other ways of knowing, like intuition, tradition, revelation, the stoned thinking favored by Andrew Weil, visions, dreams, extrapolation, speculation, and personal anecdotal experience. Well, those other ways of knowing have their place. They're useful when it comes to knowing if you're in love, or knowing whether you can trust your neighbor, or knowing if a picture is beautiful. But when it comes to knowing whether a medical treatment is effective, there's only one reliable way of knowing: controlled testing using scientific methods. Those other ways of thinking can lead people to strong beliefs, but we can't trust those beliefs to reflect reality. Only the scientific method can give us reliable knowledge. No matter how convincing a claim sounds, it must be tested before we can accept it as true. No other way of knowing shows the kind of progress that science does, with new knowledge building on old. No other way of knowing leads everyone to agree, and no other way of knowing allows us to make accurate predictions. They say, science doesn't know everything, but as the Irish comedian Darrell O'Brien pointed out, science knows it doesn't know everything, otherwise it would stop. And just because science doesn't know everything doesn't mean you can fill in the gaps with whatever fairy tale most appeals to you. Science works. Science is probably the best thing humans have ever invented. As Bill Nye the Science Guy says, science rules. In this lecture, I've talked about what science-based medicine is and why evidence-based medicine is not enough. When we set out to evaluate health claims, practices, and products, we want to use the best scientific evidence available in the light of our cumulative scientific knowledge from all relevant disciplines. Science-based medicine emphasizes that some evidence is better than others. It's very aware of all the ways clinical studies can go wrong and can lead to false conclusions, especially when improbable treatments are being tested. It considers prior plausibility, it puts clinical trial evidence into context with preclinical research, and it looks for consistency with the rest of the body of scientific knowledge. In the next lecture, I'll talk about what happens when medicine isn't science-based. Hello again, I'm Dr. Harriet Hall, and this is Lecture 2 in a series of 10 lectures on science-based medicine. In the first lecture, I talked about what science-based medicine is. Now I'll talk about what it isn't: alternative medicine. Today it's more commonly referred to as complementary and alternative medicine, and that's a mouthful. It's easier to cut it down to one syllable and just call it by its acronym, CAM. Sometimes CAM rejects science entirely. Sometimes it tries to use science and fails. Even when CAM claims to have scientific evidence to support its claims, that evidence doesn't measure up to the rigorous standards of good science. This lecture will be a general discussion of CAM, and in future lectures I'll cover specific areas of CAM like acupuncture, chiropractic, and homeopathy. What is CAM? An old definition of alternative medicine was stuff that isn't taught in medical schools. That definition doesn't really work anymore since CAM has been sneaking into our medical schools. More about that later. But here's a list of some of the things that weren't taught in my medical school. In fact, I've never even heard of most of the things on this list when I graduated back in 1970. I had heard a few of the things on this list, like chiropractic and acupuncture, but I didn't understand enough about them to have formed any opinion. And I'd never heard the term alternative medicine. Back then we would have dismissed most of the things on this list as folk medicine or superstition or quackery. Some of them sound more reasonable than others, like herbal medicine. After all, herbal medicine was the beginning of scientific pharmacology. But some of them are just batshit crazy, like sticking lighted candles in your ears, or drinking your own urine, or diluting all the active ingredient out of a remedy to make it stronger. Now, about the time I graduated, a new term was coined: alternative medicine. It was an umbrella term that lumped all the things on that list together: the impossible right along with the more plausible, the untested right along with the ones that had already been tested and proven not to work. Later, in the 1980s and 1990s, we started to hear the terms complementary medicine and integrative medicine. Alternative medicine may be used alone as an alternative to conventional medicine, or people may hedge their bets by using both alternative and conventional medicine at the same time. Complementary medicine, by definition, is never used alone. It's used along with conventional medicine to complement the conventional treatment. Integrative medicine implies that you don't just use alternative medicine along with conventional medicine, you somehow integrate the two into one unified, coherent system of practice. Now, I want to lodge a protest here. There's really no such thing as alternative medicine. There are only treatments that have been tested and proven to work, and treatments that haven't. If a treatment had been proven to work, we wouldn't call it alternative, we just call it medicine. My colleague Stephen Novella explains that CAM is a political ideological entity, not a scientific one. It's an artificial category created for the purpose of promoting a diverse set of dubious, untested, or fraudulent health practices. It is an excellent example of the successful use of language as a propaganda tool. Some people prefer to call it so-called complementary and alternative medicine, or supplements plus CAM. Either of those gives the convenient acronym SCAM. Science-based medicine starts with an idea, tests it, and if it passes the test, then it applies it to patients. CAM bypasses the step of adequate testing. It's a shortcut from idea to bedside. Let's look at this list again. The real question is not what to call those things, but whether they work. I don't think anyone believes that everything on this list works. If they do, they're not being rational because some of these things are incompatible with each other. But for every item on this list, there are people who are convinced that it works. It's curious that they never seem to fight amongst themselves. You never hear of debates between acupuncturists and homeopaths. Practitioners of one system sometimes incorporate the practices of another system, like chiropractors who adopt acupuncture or who recommend homeopathic remedies. They never seem to care that if the beliefs behind the other system were right, the beliefs behind their own system would have to be wrong. Now, CAM typically attributes all disease to one imaginary cause. Chiropractic claims that all disease is caused when spinal bones get out of alignment and interfere with nerve function. Homeopathy's inventor, Samuel Hahnemann, believed that all disease was caused by miasms. I'll explain about that in Lecture 5. Acupuncture attributes all disease to disturbances in the flow of a mythical life force called Qi. Ayurveda attributes disease to improper digestion, being out of harmony with the environment, and Ama due to aggravated doshas. When I think of aggravated doshas, I can't help imagining an angry, vicious cartoon beast like the Tasmanian devil. And Christian Science says that all disease is merely illusion due to a lack of faith. A few years ago, I did an internet search for the one true cause of all disease, and I found 67 of them. There were probably a lot more, but I got tired of looking at that point. Here's just a few of them. Allergies, oxygen deficiency, toxins, food acidity, parasites, a congested colon, yeast, free radicals, inadequate nutrition. The list went on, and it got sillier and sillier. Perhaps the silliest was, the United KKK States of America is the one true cause of all disease. Now, I don't know what that means, and I don't think I want to know. So there are at least 67 one true causes in all. Is this some kind of new math where 67 equals 1? If all disease is caused by toxins, it can't very well be caused by parasites. If it's parasites, it can't be a congested colon. When scientists encounter two mutually exclusive claims, it bothers them. They experience cognitive dissonance, and they try diligently to find evidence to reject one of the competing hypotheses. They eventually reach a consensus. Now, alternative medicine pseudoscientists don't seem to be bothered by cognitive dissonance. They're content to look for evidence to support their own chosen treatment, and they blithely disregard any competing claims. They don't want to look for evidence that something doesn't work. While each claims to know the one cause of disease, they don't seem interested in looking for the one reality. Often they don't believe there is one truth. As one woman said to me, "It could be true for you, but that doesn't mean it's true for me." In his book Voodoo Science, here's how Bob Park described a press conference held by representatives of the Office of Alternative Medicine. One insisted that the number one health problem in the United States is magnesium deficiency. Another was convinced that the expanded use of acupuncture could revolutionize medicine. And so it went around the table with each touting his or her preferred therapy. But there was no sense of conflict or rivalry. As each spoke, the others would nod in agreement. The purpose of the OAM, I began to realize, was to demonstrate that these disparate therapies all work. It was my first glimpse of what holds alternative medicine together. There is no internal dissent in a community that feels itself besieged from the outside. Each CAM recognizes its own single cause of all disease, a single cause that is wrong. Science recognizes that there are many causes of disease, and it organizes them into these 9 categories under the acronym VINDICATE. V for vascular, I for infectious or inflammatory, N for neoplastic, D for drugs and toxins, I for interventional or iatrogenic, in other words, caused by treatment, C for congenital and developmental, A for autoimmune, T for trauma, E for endocrine and metabolic. And science recognizes that a single illness can involve more than one cause, for instance, when a traumatic injury becomes infected. We're seeing a trend where obsolete treatments are making a comeback. The top picture is the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital, founded in 1849. It's still in business, but it recently changed its name from homeopathic to integrative. The bottom picture is the Massachusetts Homeopathic Hospital around 1916. Now, back in 1900, there were 79 homeopathic hospitals in the U.S. The last one closed in 1950. So homeopathy was almost extinct in the U.S., but recently it seems to be reviving. Some healthcare providers are recommending homeopathy, and homeopathic remedies are being sold over the counter in pharmacies. So what happened? Why did those old discredited treatment methods that had almost disappeared start to come back in the 1980s and 90s? In 1994, the U.S. Congress passed the Diet Supplement Health and Education Act, exempting herbal medicines from FDA regulation, under the pretense that they were diet supplements intended to be used as foods rather than as medicines. In 1998, the NIH founded the National Centers for Complementary and Alternative Medicine to do scientific studies on alternative medicine. Insurance companies began paying for things like acupuncture and chiropractic, and some of these formerly discredited treatments were introduced into hospitals and medical schools in a movement that we call quackademic medicine. I'll be coming back to these issues in Lecture 10. How did attitudes change? Why is CAM suddenly so popular? Well, there's no simple answer, but I think there are several reasons for the trend. For one thing, science had a run of outstanding successes. Antibiotics cured pneumonia, we eradicated smallpox, we transplanted kidneys, we expected science to go on to cure cancer and every other disease, and when that didn't happen, we got frustrated. We're healthier than we've ever been, and now the absence of disease is no longer enough for us. We want something more. We want some elusive state of perfect health. Instead of dying young of infections, we live into old age, and we develop the diseases of aging, like arthritis, heart disease, and cancer. Prosperity is increasing. Fewer people have to worry about where their next meal is coming from, and the worried well have the luxury of being concerned about every little mole and itch. The normal vicissitudes of everyday life have been reinterpreted as symptoms requiring treatment, and we've even invented imaginary diseases like chronic candidiasis and the need for detoxification. Science isn't perfect. Drugs have side effects. People distrust the establishment, the government, Big Pharma, the AMA. They perceive the scientific method as artificial and unnatural. People don't really understand the scientific method. There's always been an anti-intellectual tendency in America throughout history. Americans value equality, self-help, individualism, and the democratic idea that everyone's opinion counts. We have derogatory names for people who know stuff, like geeks and nerds and eggheads and highbrows. Modern medicine is seen as impersonal and obsessed with technology, and it's perceived as not responding to the patient's experience of illness on a human level. One of the commenters on the Science-Based Medicine blog said this: public demand for SCAM is due to only one factor, the deplorable widespread lack of critical thinking skills. I tend to agree. Just how widespread is CAM? Well, that depends on how you ask the question. This is from a 2002 CDC study. It shows the percentage of people who reported using each CAM modality in the previous 12 months. Look at the bottom two items. 62% said they used CAM, but when they excluded prayer, only about 36% said they used CAM. The most popular CAM was natural products at 19%, and leading the list of natural products were echinacea, ginseng, ginkgo, and garlic supplements. Breathing exercises came next at 12%. Chiropractic followed at 7.5%, and then meditation, yoga, massage, and diet-based therapies. Notice that acupuncture and homeopathy didn't even make the list. They were only used by 1% each in the United States. They're more popular in other countries, but they're still not very widespread. 10% of the people in the UK use homeopathy, and only 6% of people in Taiwan use acupuncture. Here's what people answered when they were asked why they used CAM. 55% believed that combining it with conventional treatment would help. 50% thought that it would be interesting to try. 26% said a medical professional had suggested it. 28% believed conventional medicine wouldn't help them, and 13% said conventional medicine was too expensive. And what health conditions did they use it for? Well, back pain was by far the most common condition treated with alternative medicine. The top three were back and musculoskeletal pain, colds, and anxiety or depression at 50%, 9.5%, and 4.5% respectively. A smaller percentage used it for gastrointestinal problems, for headache, and for insomnia. Fewer still used it for sinusitis, cholesterol, asthma, blood pressure, and menopause, around 1% each. And what kind of people use CAM? Well, CAM users were more likely to be women than men. They weren't the oldest or the youngest. They were most likely to be Asians and least likely to be African Americans. They were likely to be better educated, to have a higher income, to have private health insurance, to live in urban areas, particularly the West Coast, to drink alcohol, to be former smokers, and to have been recently hospitalized. So I think we can conclude that there's no one simple answer to who is likely to use CAM and why. What sets CAM apart from science-based medicine is basically a lack of testing. Really, by definition, CAM consists of treatments that are not supported by enough evidence to have earned a place in mainstream medicine. Quite often, CAM denies that there's even any need for testing. They're content with testimonials and poorly documented anecdotes, in contrast to science-based medicine's rigorously documented case reports and clinical studies. And when CAM does test treatments, it tries to prove that something works rather than to ask if it works. And many of the studies it does are poorly designed and substandard. CAM's ideology tends to ignore biologic mechanisms, to disparage modern science, and to rely on ancient and natural remedies. My friend Carol is very intelligent, well-educated, and skeptical about most things, but here's how she decides whether to use a CAM treatment. She'll try pretty much anything as long as it meets these three criteria. A friend said it helped them, it sounds plausible to her, and it doesn't sound harmful. She's willing to go by anecdotal evidence when a friend says it worked for me. Science isn't even on her list of criteria. She doesn't bother to ask if testing shows that it works. She says science doesn't know everything. She told me that when she feels a cold coming on, she takes echinacea, and she hasn't had a cold in 7 years. I told her when I feel a cold coming on, I don't take echinacea, and I haven't had a cold in 7 years either. So if she accepted her own experience as proof that echinacea worked to prevent colds, she ought to accept my experience that not taking echinacea works to prevent colds. She decided we would just have to agree to disagree. CAM is considered more natural than conventional medicine, and people find this very appealing, but the appeal to nature is a logical fallacy called argumentum ad naturam. Natural isn't always good. Think strychnine. There's really nothing natural about many of the treatments CAM offers, like sticking needles in the ear. In his excellent book, Snake Oil Science, The Truth About Complementary and Alternative Medicine, R. Barker Bassell reviewed the published evidence for CAM and concluded, there is no compelling credible evidence to suggest that any CAM therapy benefits any medical condition or reduces any medical symptom, pain or otherwise, better than a placebo. This is my friend Edzard Ernst, an MD from Germany. Early in his career, he was involved with several kinds of CAM, including homeopathy, acupuncture, herbalism, and manipulation. But as time went on, he began to question them. He got a PhD and set out to research CAM treatments and find out what worked and what didn't. He found that most of CAM didn't work. He became the world's first professor of complementary medicine at the University of Exeter in the UK. He and his team have published over 700 scientific papers evaluating CAM. Edzard Ernst and Simon Singh wrote this excellent book, Trick or Treatment, The Undeniable Facts About Alternative Medicine. After reviewing all the undeniable facts, they concluded, while there is tentative evidence that acupuncture might be effective for some forms of pain relief and nausea, it fails to deliver any medical benefit in any other situations, and its underlying concepts are meaningless. And note the qualifications, tentative and might. With respect to homeopathy, the evidence points towards a bogus industry that offers patients nothing more than a fantasy. Chiropractors, on the other hand, might compete with physiotherapists in terms of treating some back problems, but all their other claims are beyond belief and can carry a range of significant risks. Herbal medicine undoubtedly offers some interesting remedies, but they are significantly outnumbered by the unproven, disproven, and downright dangerous herbal medicines on the market. Wow, that's not very impressive, is it? I'll be covering each of those in separate lectures. There's a spectrum of plausibility in CAM. The plausibility of homeopathy is essentially zero. Acupuncture has some plausibility. The underlying oriental concepts are implausible, but it is plausible that inserting needles in the skin could possibly cause physiological effects. The plausibility of herbal medicine is high. After all, the whole science of pharmacology developed out of studying plants, and about half of all the drugs we use today are derived from plants. So herbal remedies might work, but they need to be individually tested just like any other drug. CAM insists it is better than conventional medicine. They constantly criticize doctors with accusations like these. Doctors cut, burn, and poison, referring to surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. Well, conventional treatments have side effects, but they also save lives, which CAM doesn't. They say doctors only treat symptoms, not the underlying cause. And that's an outright lie. If you have pneumonia, doctors don't just treat your symptoms of fever and cough with aspirin and cough syrup. They identify the causative bacteria and they kill it with antibiotics. MDs treat real underlying causes. CAM treats imaginary ones. They say doctors are only in it for the money. Well, so is CAM. Doctors have to make a living, and so do CAM practitioners. They don't offer their services for free. Then they say that most of conventional medicine isn't evidence-based either. But it is, too. That's another lie. They'll tell you that only 10 to 20% of what conventional doctors do is based on evidence. But that's a myth based on misinterpretation of an old British study about controlling prescription costs. It looked at whether evidence was being followed, not about whether there was valid evidence. By the best estimates, at least 76% of conventional medicine is supported by some form of compelling evidence, and 37% is supported by gold standard randomized controlled trials. A lot of what we do is common sense, and it doesn't need to be tested, like whether we should try to stop wounds from bleeding or immobilize a fracture. And some of what we do, like vaccines, has been adequately tested and is solidly based on good evidence, but vaccines critics ask for more studies, the kind of studies that can't be ethically done because it would put the placebo group at risk of vaccine-preventable diseases, as well as risking public health by decreasing herd immunity. Now think about it. Even if it were true that only 20% of conventional medicine was based on good evidence, why would anyone want to trade it for a system that was based on 0% evidence? One of the hallmarks of science is that it's self-correcting. When the evidence shows that something doesn't work, science discards it. We're not doing bloodletting anymore. We're not doing routine annual chest x-rays anymore. CAM rarely discards anything. In over 100 years, chiropractic has added over 200 new techniques and has discarded exactly one thing, a bogus diagnostic technique of tracing nerves with the fingers. If a scientific study appears to support a CAM treatment, they brag about it and they cite it as justification. If science shows that a CAM treatment doesn't work, they disregard the evidence and make excuses. They say their treatments are special and they're individualized for each unique person, and they can't really be studied with randomized controlled scientific trials. But of course they can, as long as the studies are properly designed. For instance, a homeopath could prescribe individualized remedies, and someone else could randomly give the patient either what was prescribed or a placebo. One negative trial concluded that the treatment worked, but this study was unable to demonstrate that. I mean, come on. Valcel, the author of Snake Oil Science, says CAM therapists do not value and often do not understand the scientific process. Here are the typical stages of CAM reasoning. First, they say, I've seen it work for my patients. I don't need science to tell me that it works. And then they realize science is important, so they say, okay, we'll do science. And they do studies, not to ask if X works, but to prove to others that X works. They collect proof in the form of small, poorly designed studies that are marginally positive. When the flaws in those studies are pointed out, they do better studies. But the better the study, the worse the results. Eventually, they realize, oops, the best evidence shows that X is no better than placebo. Finally, they fall back on, placebos are good, so let's use X anyway. They argue that we want people to feel better, and placebos make people feel better, but there are problems with that argument. This is a good place to go into a digression about placebos. Placebos are very widely misunderstood, and understanding them is essential to understanding science-based medicine. First, let me clarify one thing. The word placebo confuses our thinking. It has two very different meanings in two very different settings. Placebos is used in the research setting for a control group in a placebo-controlled trial, and placebos is used in the clinical setting to treat patients in the doctor's office. We can't even talk about placebos meaningfully until we get this straight. Here are some of the things people have said about placebos. It has been proven that placebos can cure 30% of disease. And how about this? The placebo effect is arguably the most underrated discovery of modern medicine. Replace just the placebo effect with the amazing placebo effect, the mind-boggling placebo effect. To my way of thinking, the very existence of this mysterious effect proves that God exists. That's right, you can find evidence for the foundational truths taught by religion in virtually every double-blind medical research study. Well, I think most of you would reject the second claim. I sure hope you would. But a lot of people would agree with the first claim, that placebos can cure 30% of disease. They would be wrong, because placebos have never cured any disease. That's important enough to merit its own slide. Placebos have never cured any disease. The 30% claim is based on a misunderstanding of the 1955 study by a doctor named Beecher. He reviewed studies with treatment and placebo arms, and he found that an average of 32% of subjects in the placebo group reported improvement. But that doesn't mean that placebos cured those 32%. In the first place, improvement is not the same as cure, and some of them improved because of the natural course of illness, or appeared to improve because of errors and biases in measurement, errors like regression to the mean. In 2001, Rob Jartson did a much more meaningful study. He reviewed studies that had both a placebo and a no treatment arm, so that he could compare the improvement with placebo treatments to the improvement with no treatment at all. And he concluded that placebos don't work. The no treatment groups improved just as much as the placebo groups, with two exceptions, pain and nausea. Patients may report subjective improvement of symptoms like pain and nausea with placebos, but placebos have no effect on any objective measurements. They don't improve survival from cancer or speed recovery from infections. They won't lower your cholesterol, reduce your risk of a heart attack, or improve your pulmonary function test results in asthma. Here's what Beecher's 32% really means. The response in the drug group is a combination of the specific pharmacological effect in red and everything else in yellow. In the placebo control group, there's no pharmacological effect, only the effect of non-specific factors like suggestion and the natural course of illness. In a placebo control study, we're asking one simple question. Does the drug work better than placebo? The pharmaceutical company doesn't care about why people in the placebo group improved. They're only interested in telling whether their drug works better. But we're interested in finding out what's happening in the placebo group. Some people believe placebos are really doing something. They say, if treatment X were only a placebo, it wouldn't work on animals. Treatment X works on animals, so it must be more effective than a placebo. But there's a problem with that reasoning. Animals can't tell us how they feel. It's their owners who have to interpret their behavior, and there can be placebo effects on the owner. If they expect to see improvement, they probably will. They may treat the animal differently, and animals respond to attention. We know that suggestion plays a big part in the placebo response. Studies have shown that some placebos are better than others. There's a whole hierarchy of placebo response. Surgery is more effective than pills. Injections are better than pills. Capsules are better than tablets. Big pills are better than small. The more doses a day, the better. The more expensive, the better. Color makes a difference. And if placebos are given for a firm diagnosis, they work better than if there's uncertainty. Here's a new framework that doesn't require using the word placebo at all. The two bars on the left show the research setting, where all we care about is whether the specific effect of the drug being tested in red is greater than the non-specific effects of treatment in yellow. On the right is the clinical setting, where red is the specific effect of treatment and green is natural healing. There's a small remaining effect that is not explained by the specific effect of the treatment or by the natural course of healing, and we can call that the contextual effect of the treatment encountered. But how do these contextual effects work? Well, we know about several mechanisms. Psychological mechanisms like conditioning and suggestion, and neurobiological mechanisms like the release of natural painkillers and neurotransmitters in the brain. An elegant study by Thomas demonstrated the power of suggestion. He divided patients into 4 groups. The first group got a positive consultation, the second group got a positive consultation plus a placebo, the third group got a negative consultation, and the fourth group got a negative consultation plus a placebo. In the positive consultations, the patient was given a firm diagnosis and was told confidently that he would be better in a few days. If no placebo was to be given, he was told that in the doctor's opinion he didn't require any treatment. And if a placebo was to be given, he was told, here's a medicine that will certainly make you better. In the negative consultation, the doctor said, I can't be certain what's the matter with you. If no placebo was to be given, he said, and therefore I will give you no treatment. If a placebo was to be given, he said, I'm not sure that this treatment I'm going to give you will have any effect. And here's what happened. In the 2 groups that had a positive consultation, the response was 64%. In the 2 groups that got a negative consultation, the response was significantly lower at 39%. In the 2 groups that got placebos, the response rate was 53%. And in the 2 groups that didn't get placebos, the response rate was 50%, not significantly different. They concluded that improvement was due to suggestion created by the doctor, and it had nothing to do with whether they were given a placebo object. So you can get a placebo effect without a placebo. This 2008 study of subjects with irritable bowel syndrome showed just how important the doctor-patient relationship is. One group was simply put on a waiting list and got no treatment. 28% of them improved. Another group got no frills acupuncture, just needle insertion without any interaction with the provider. 44% of those improved. The last group got acupuncture with TLC, involving special attention from the provider, a warm relationship, building trust, sustained attention, and 62% of them improved. They concluded non-specific effects can produce statistically and clinically significant outcomes, and the patient-practitioner relationship is the most robust component. Placebos are essential in medical research, but they have no place in clinical practice. Here are some of the arguments against using them. They destroy trust in the doctor-patient relationship. Their effect is unpredictable, small, and it doesn't last long. There's an unfavorable risk-benefit ratio with a small possibility of harm. Placebos waste time and money. The use of placebos may involve delaying or rejecting effective treatment, and believing false claims leads to rejection of real science. But here are the two strongest arguments against doctors giving placebos to patients. First, they're unethical. Medical ethicists unanimously agree that doctors should not deceive patients. Second, they're unnecessary. You can get a placebo effect without giving placebos and without lying to patients, just from the contextual effects of the therapeutic encounter. Ted Kaptchuk thought there might be a way around the ethical dilemma. You could give patients a placebo and tell them it was a placebo, and it might still work. And it did. When patients were told they were getting placebo sugar pills, they got better. So Kaptchuk thought he had given placebos without deception. But when you look at what he told patients, it's obvious that there was deception. The informed consent form claimed that placebos could have powerful effects. Now, when is CAM a scam? Stephen Barrett of Quackwatch has defined quackery as the promotion of unsubstantiated methods that lack a scientifically plausible rationale, and that describes most of CAM. Quackery doesn't necessarily require deliberate deception. Some quacks are deliberately fooling their customers, but some truly believe in what they're doing. They fool themselves. The latest incarnation of CAM is so-called integrated medicine. Integrated medicine clinics are springing up everywhere. According to the National Centers for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, integrated medicine combines mainstream medical therapies and CAM therapies for which there is some high-quality scientific evidence of safety and effectiveness. Which doesn't make any sense, because if there was high-quality scientific evidence of safety and effectiveness, it wouldn't be CAM, it would be part of conventional medicine. What integrated medicine is really doing is combining science-based medicine with non-science-based medicine. Mark Crislip says that integrating CAM with science-based medicine is like integrating fantasy with reality, like integrating cow pies with apple pies. It doesn't improve the taste of either. Michael Vagg calls integrated medicine lipstick on the ideological pig of CAM. So back to the original question, what is CAM? Where we once defined CAM as things that aren't taught in medical schools, today we can define it as medicine that is so unproven, untested, or implausible that it hasn't earned a place in conventional medicine. Here's another definition of CAM. A spectrum of implausible beliefs and claims about health and disease. These range from the untestable and absurd to the possible but not very intriguing. In all cases, the enthusiasm of advocates vastly exceeds the scientific promise. In the next lecture, I'll talk about how these general principles apply to a specific CAM modality, chiropractic. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Harriet Hall, and this is Lecture 3 in a series of 10 lectures on science-based medicine. In the last lecture, I talked about CAM in general, and now let's look at some specifics. Of all the things in alternative medicine, chiropractic is probably the most widely accepted. 30% of Americans have visited a chiropractor in their lifetime. It's not so popular in other parts of the world. There are 50,000 chiropractors in the United States, but about half the countries in the world have no chiropractors at all. Chiropractors are not medical doctors. They can say they're doctors because they hold the DC degree, Doctor of Chiropractic. If a chiropractor calls himself Dr. Jones and doesn't explain, his patients may assume that he's a medical doctor. Some people don't even know there's a difference. They think chiropractors are just MDs who specialize in the back. Most customers go to chiropractors for treatment of back pain, but some people go to chiropractors for all their health needs and for health maintenance and prevention, and that's a mistake. These claims were made by a chiropractor in the comments on the Science-Based Medicine blog. They are all false. Chiropractic is not a science, it's a pre-scientific belief system. It is not based on neurology, anatomy, and physiology. It's based on a myth, the myth of the so-called chiropractic subluxation. Chiropractors are not doctors of the nervous system. Neurologists are doctors of the nervous system. Chiropractors are more like physical therapists. And there's no evidence that chiropractic care improves health or quality of life. I'm going to tell you how chiropractic originated, what chiropractic theory says, and why science rejects it. I'm going to tell you about some of the complications chiropractic can cause. I'm going to show you that chiropractic is a magnet for quackery, for unproven and implausible tests and treatments. I'm going to tell you about some of the harmful and unethical things that some chiropractors do. And finally, I'm going to tell you what chiropractors do that really works. And I'm going to give you some guidelines on how to choose one. Chiropractic is not a science. It's the brainchild of a single individual who invented chiropractic all by himself in a single day. The day was September 18th, 1895. It says so right there on his monument. The inventor had no training in science or medicine. He was a grocer and a magnetic healer named D.D. Palmer. He based his whole theory on one patient. He thought a bone was out of place in a deaf janitor's back. He pressed on the janitor's back and thought he had replaced the bone, and immediately the janitor said he could hear again, according to Palmer. According to the janitor's daughter, her daddy remained deaf until the day he died. We'll never know what really happened, but we can be sure that nothing Palmer did to the janitor's back could have restored his hearing. Palmer was ignorant of anatomy. He didn't know that the nerves to the ear are all in the skull, with no connection to the spine. And today, few if any chiropractors would even try to treat deafness. But Palmer was convinced, and from this one case, he extrapolated to say that he had found the one cause of all disease. Really, he thought that all disease was due to subluxation, bones out of place, 95% to subluxation in the spine, and 5% to subluxations of other bones. He didn't test his idea to see if he was right. He knew he was right, so he proceeded to develop a thriving practice cracking backs. Now think about the state of medicine in 1895. Conventional medical treatments of the day were just as likely to harm as to heal. Pasteur, who discovered germs, died in 1895, and the germ theory of disease wasn't yet widely accepted. The first antibiotic didn't come along for another 50 years. And 1895 was the same year Röntgen discovered X-rays, so when D.D. Palmer thought he felt a bone out of place, he had no way of verifying it. D.D. Palmer lived in a pre-scientific world, and he didn't know any better. But modern chiropractors don't have that excuse. Don't confuse chiropractic with osteopathy. D.O. is Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. D.C. is Doctor of Chiropractic. Chiropractors and osteopaths originated about the same time, and they did the same back manipulations, but the osteopaths thought they were restoring blood flow, and the chiropractors thought they were restoring nerve flow. DOs accepted scientific medicine, and today an American DO gets the same training as an MD plus training in spinal manipulation techniques. In the United States, DOs have to pass the same licensing exams as MDs, and they take the same internships and residency training. They practice mainstream medicine, and they seldom do manipulations once they're out in practice. For chiropractors, manipulations are their main reason for existing. There are three parts to chiropractic theory: subluxation, nerve impairment, and innate. Subluxation is the idea that displacement of bones is the root of all disease. Palmer imagined that he could feel bones out of place in the spine, and he thought he could put them back. Nerve impairment is the idea that all body functions are governed by nerves from the spine, and that displaced bones interfere with nerve function by stretching or compressing nerves where they exit the spine. Innate. Palmer thought a mystical vital force called innate was transmitted through the nerves, and that realigning the spine would restore proper flow of innate, which would cure disease. All three of these ideas are false. First, subluxation. Subluxation is a medical term for a partial dislocation. You can see real subluxations on x-rays. The picture on the left shows a torn finger ligament that has allowed a subluxation or a partial dislocation or slippage. The x-ray on the right shows a complete dislocation of the same joint. Actual bone displacements are obvious on x-rays. The chiropractic subluxation is not. Chiropractors think they can see subluxations on x-rays, but different chiropractors see them at different locations on the same x-ray, and radiologists don't see them at all. When chiropractors were tested on before and after x-rays, they couldn't tell a difference. When chiropractic schools were challenged to produce sample teaching x-rays demonstrating subluxations, they weren't able to do so. When a chiropractor produces an audible crack in your back, he may tell you it's the sound of the bone popping back into place, but it isn't. It's just the same kind of sound you get when you crack your knuckles, and it's produced by gas rushing in to fill a vacuum when two bones are pulled apart at a joint to create a potential space. It creates a little bubble with a big sound. Remember when your mom told you to stop cracking your knuckles because it was bad for you? Well, it probably wasn't, but some orthopedic specialists worry that repeatedly forcing a spinal joint beyond the normal range of motion may stretch the ligaments. It might loosen the joints and make the patient more prone to developing back pain. We don't know if that's true, but some patients do seem to become addicted to adjustments. The more they get, the more they seem to need. Chiropractors originally believed in BOOP, bones out of place. When that theory couldn't be demonstrated on x-ray, they said silly things like, well, there is a displacement that's enough to cause disease, but it's too tiny to show up on an x-ray. Eventually, they had to give up on BOOP. They redefined subluxation and said it was a complex of functional and/or structural and/or pathological articular changes that compromise neural integrity and may influence organ system and general health. Does that even mean anything? I think it's just gobbledygook. A disease like diabetes is defined so that every doctor who evaluates the patient will make the same diagnosis. But this vague definition of subluxation can be interpreted pretty much any way you choose. It really just amounts to a pretext, an excuse to treat anyone the chiropractor wants to treat. Some chiropractors are now rejecting the subluxation concept entirely. A recent study by chiropractors found no supportive evidence for the chiropractic subluxation being associated with any disease process or creating suboptimal health conditions. And they concluded the subluxation construct has no valid clinical applicability. But the law still defines chiropractic in terms of the subluxation, and the word subluxation is still very much in common use. The second part of chiropractic theory is nerve impairment. Palmer thought all body functions were governed by nerves from the spine. They aren't. He didn't know about cranial nerves, and he didn't know about hormones. And apparently he didn't realize that some spinal nerves exit through the sacrum, and the sacrum can't be manipulated. Today, with organ transplants, we know that you can sever all the nerves to an organ and transplant it into another person's body, and it still works just fine. And true subluxations don't necessarily affect nerves. You can have a subluxation without nerve impairment, and you can have nerve impairment without subluxation. In a condition called spondylolisthesis, true subluxations have occurred, and you can see them on x-ray, but they may not cause any pain or impairment unless the displacement is very advanced, and the pain is usually muscle pain rather than nerve pain. One condition where nerves are affected is a ruptured disc. When a disc ruptures, the disc material breaks through the fibrous annulus and puts pressure on the nerve, but there is no displacement of the bones with a ruptured disc. Chiropractic claims that pressure on a nerve impedes the flow of messages through the nerve like stepping on a garden hose, as in this picture from an early chiropractic advertisement. Today we know that's false. Nerve impulses don't flow like water. They are electrical impulses, and today we can actually measure nerve conduction speeds. In carpal tunnel syndrome, the nerve is compressed in a small area at the wrist. We make the diagnosis by showing that the nerve conduction is normal above and below the wrist and slowed only across the area of compression. And just how easy is it to pinch a nerve? Well, here's a picture showing how the relatively small spinal nerves come out of a big hole between the vertebrae. The spine is built to allow movement. The cross-section on the right shows the available space in white and the diameter of the nerve in black. It shows that there's plenty of room, so that even a large displacement of bones would not cause a problem. One pathologist took a spine from an autopsy, and he showed that you could bend the spine into a U shape before there was any impingement on spinal nerves. If nerves were that easy to pinch, this woman would be in real trouble. The third part of chiropractic theory is innate. Innate is a mystical power that maintains health. It is a semi-religious concept, and D.D. Palmer actually thought of making chiropractic a religion at one point. This is a diagram that chiropractors have used to show how the patient's innate is influenced by the chiropractor's innate, kind of like ESP. I don't know what that little trapdoor in the patient's head is supposed to be. The cadaver I dissected in my gross anatomy class didn't have one of those. Does this sound a bit like New Age, you create your own reality nonsense? This is not science. This is a philosophical position called vitalism, the idea that some unmeasurable, undefined, undetectable life energy invests material bodies. There is absolutely no objective evidence that any such force exists. Vitalism has been soundly rejected by science. Like many myths, this one has a grain of truth behind it. Doctors don't heal patients. The body heals itself. Medical treatment only makes it easier for the body to do that. But the healing isn't accomplished by any woo-woo force. Healing occurs through physiologic processes that can be detected and studied. Chiropractic manipulations can cause harm. Neck manipulations can cause strokes by damaging the vertebral arteries. Here's how it happens. This is the normal position of the vertebral artery going straight up the side of the neck into the base of the skull. When you turn your head, it kinks. Now, arteries are pretty elastic, and turning your own head is usually no problem. But imagine being jerked into this position forcefully during manipulation, or having the joint forced beyond its normal range of motion. That can cause a small tear in the delicate lining of the artery. Sometimes this causes immediate damage from bleeding, but sometimes the tear is temporarily sealed with a clot, and later on the clot breaks loose, travels to the brain, and clogs an artery, causing a delayed stroke as much as several days later. With a delayed reaction, the connection to manipulation may be missed. How often does that happen? Well, by one estimate, 20% of one kind of stroke, basilar strokes, are due to spinal manipulations. That works out to 1,300 strokes a year in the United States. Patients with basilar strokes who were under the age of 45 were 5 times more likely than controls to have visited a chiropractor within a week of the event. Chiropractic strokes are underreported. Neurologists who see stroke patients don't routinely ask about chiropractic care, and if the stroke is delayed, the connection may not be apparent. This is Sandra Nettie. She was a healthy 40-year-old woman who was feeling fine, but she went to her chiropractor for a maintenance adjustment that she thought would help keep her healthy. When the chiropractor used a rapid thrust maneuver on her neck, she suddenly felt dizzy and unwell. When she complained, the chiropractor didn't recognize that it was an emergency. His only response was to offer to sell her massage services. He let her try to drive herself home, and she only made it part way. Doctors found tears in both of her vertebral arteries, one of them 3 inches long. As the stroke progressed, she developed locked-in syndrome, an intact mind locked in a paralyzed body. She was in pain, was unable to eat or breathe on her own, and was able to move one arm, just enough to type on a special keyboard. She sued. The chiropractor later admitted to the court that after he learned he was going to be sued, he had forged Sandra's signature on an informed consent form. Chiropractors have tried to defend themselves by saying the patients who had strokes had come to them with neck pain because they were already in the early stages of a stroke. But Sandra had no neck pain. Neither did Laura Jean Mathiasen. She originally went to a chiropractor for pain in her tailbone. By one account, she had a whopping 186 manipulations over a 6-month period. I haven't been able to confirm that, but other sources said she had over 20 neck manipulations. With the last one, she went into convulsions on the chiropractor's table. The chiropractor's only response was to try to revive her by slapping her face. She died in a coma 3 days later. Even when patients do have neck pain, if chiropractors can't identify patients in the early stages of stroke, they have no business manipulating their necks. We don't know the actual risk of stroke from neck manipulation because the appropriate studies haven't been done. Strokes are undoubtedly rare, but if a drug had the same small risk of stroke and so little demonstrable benefit, then it would almost certainly have been taken off the market. Here are some of the other undesirable effects from manipulation. Half of patients experience local discomfort, headache, tiredness, and radiating discomfort. More serious complications include broken bones, herniated discs, disability, paralysis, and even death. I read about one family that kept going back to the same chiropractor until 3 family members had suffered strokes. Some chiropractors deny that manipulation can cause strokes, but their insurance companies are aware that there's a problem. In 2002, 9% of the claims paid by the major chiropractic insurance company were for strokes. That isn't proof that they were caused by manipulation, but it is proof that the insurance companies can't deny that there's a problem. When it comes to quackery, chiropractic is a veritable duck pond. Chiropractors are quack magnets. They adopt every new idea that might increase their patient count, no matter how crazy, and they keep using quack methods even after they've been disproven. I'll give just a few examples. Moiré contour analysis maps the surface of the body and supposedly picks up asymmetries that help locate disease areas. It doesn't work. Chiropractors have been using these gadgets for almost a century. They run it down your back with a prong on either side of the spine. It's supposed to pick up temperature differences to pinpoint subluxations. Unfortunately, the needle also moves when you press harder, so it's real easy to fool yourself. For patients who don't like the idea of having their back forcibly cracked, the activator is a spring-loaded device that can be adjusted to various impacts that can be as light as a finger tap. This machine that looks sort of like a drill press is a special activator that taps a specific spot on the atlas, the top cervical vertebra, at a carefully calculated angle. Adjusting the atlas is supposed to fix the entire spine. Applied kinesiology is a bogus muscle testing technique that a whopping 43% of American chiropractors use to diagnose allergies and other conditions. They believe it even works by proxy. This chiropractor is diagnosing the little girl by testing the strength in her mother's arm. This is a toughness device. The operator rubs his fingers on the detection plate and claims to feel a stickiness when the device is positioned over a subluxation. It's totally bogus. It was banned by the FDA in 1980, but it's still being used. In 1991, 3.3% of chiropractors were still using it. In 2007, the FDA confiscated 96 of them. And as recently as 2013, the California Board of Chiropractic Examiners disciplined chiropractor David Menago for using one. Some chiropractors use a variety of other bogus tests and treatments. This is just a partial list. It includes things like homeopathy and divination with a pendulum. I won't read the list now, but you can find it in the course guide. Chiropractors used to routinely take full spine x-rays that exposed the pelvis and reproductive organs to unnecessary radiation, and were mostly out of focus because of the different thickness of the body at different levels. They still do a lot of unnecessary x-rays. X-rays are not indicated for most common cases of low back pain. They may recommend repeating x-rays at frequent intervals to assess progress, which is silly because subluxations don't show on x-ray. The only legitimate reason for x-rays is to make sure there are no fractures or tumors or anything else that would be a contraindication to manipulation. CME, or continuing medical education for chiropractors, often amounts to courses in practice management to boost their patient count, and they often engage in unethical advertising. D.D. Palmer's son BJ was a publicity genius and something of a con man. He had a favorite saying that the spine supports the ribs, supports the skull, and supports the chiropractor. He was interested only in making money. They put blind ads in the newspaper that don't reveal that they're chiropractors, even though that practice is prohibited by the ethical guidelines of their own organizations. They offer to mail you free medical reports about new discoveries to treat back pain or whiplash or to cure ruptured discs by space-age technology with no need for surgery. There are no new discoveries, just minor variations on old techniques, and they have to sneak this information to you by mailing you a report at your request because the FTC would not allow them to make false claims in direct advertising. They do anything and everything to drum up business, like the free exam and the double scale at the county fair that diagnoses everyone as lopsided. I mean, just try standing on 2 scales and getting them both to register the same weight. These free exams are guaranteed to find subluxations in every customer, and chiropractors will tell you that everyone needs regular chiropractic adjustments to maintain normal health. Some chiropractors give very bad advice. Less than 50% of chiropractors support immunizations, and some are adamantly against them. Many are against water fluoridation. Many of them give diet advice based on unsubstantiated theories, and they sell diet supplements and vitamins out of their office at inflated prices. Many of them try to persuade their patients to avoid conventional medical care, claiming that it's almost always harmful. Some want to be your family doctor, but they're not trained to fill that role. Some of them have missed obvious diagnoses that required referral. In one study, a patient went to several chiropractors complaining of the symptoms of a heart attack. Instead of rushing him to the ER, they all offered him chiropractic adjustments for his pain. In another study, chiropractors failed to recognize that a high fever in a very young infant was an emergency. Most of them just offered to adjust the infant's spine. Many chiropractors create a chiropractic neurosis by doing lifelong maintenance adjustments and convincing patients that every symptom they get, every sniffle or itch, is a reason to run back to the chiropractor because it means their last adjustment has slipped. A chiropractor in my town, Puyallup, Washington, had a website where he claimed that childbirth stretches a baby's neck up to 2.5 times its normal length. I tried to tell him that if childbirth could do that, you wouldn't have a baby anymore, just a corpse. It's impossible to stretch a baby's neck that far. The bones don't stretch, and they can't separate because they're tightly bound by muscles and ligaments. Just try stretching your Thanksgiving turkey's neck to 2.5 times its normal length. It can't be done. His website also claimed that every newborn should be adjusted as soon as possible after birth, preferably right in the delivery room, and that delaying chiropractic treatment until puberty could cause irreversible damage. This is nothing but the most errant bullspit. Babies' bones haven't even finished forming. They mostly consist of separate ossification centers in a cartilage matrix. Here's a chiropractic ad for earaches. Ear infections are the number one reason for children to visit a chiropractor, but there's no evidence that chiropractic works for ear infections. Chiropractors can get away with claiming that it does because most ear infections will go away on their own without treatment. Occasionally they miss an infection that does require antibiotics, and complications like mastoiditis and brain infections can occur. They make other claims for pediatric conditions like colic, but there's no evidence that chiropractic benefits any pediatric condition. Many authorities feel that no child under the age of 12 should have chiropractic treatment, period. A skeptical chiropractor named Samuel Hamola says that manipulating children is scientifically indefensible, and it puts children at risk for things like brain bleeds and paraplegia, and fatal brain and spine injuries. It also delays diagnosis of treatable illnesses like cancer and meningitis. I found a chiropractic website that had a cynical list of ploys to deliberately undermine the parents' trust in their pediatrician and get them to bring their kids to a chiropractor for their primary care. An example: examine a child's spine and say, like you found something worrisome, and then ask mom if the child breastfed more from the right breast or the left breast. Whichever she answers, say, I thought so, and then ask, did your pediatrician ever ask you that? Chiropractors come in different flavors. These are their professional organizations. The International Chiropractors Association is for straights. The American Chiropractic Association is for mixers. The straights limit their practice to chiropractic adjustments only. The mixers may add anything from massage to voodoo. There is also a small group of upper cervical or NUCCA practitioners who only work on the top vertebra in the neck. Even most other chiropractors think that they're wrong. They follow the hole-in-one theory, the idea that if you adjust the atlas, the top vertebra, the rest of the spine will somehow magically fall into alignment. The picture supposedly shows how health and healing messages travel from the brain down to the atlas vertebra but can't get past it if the head and neck are misaligned, which is nonsense. They take unnecessary x-rays, they draw lines on x-rays before and after treatment, and they pretend to show improvement by drawing the lines slightly differently. They claim to treat everything from allergies and ear infections to multiple sclerosis and epilepsy. There's a NUCCA practitioner in Seattle that I call the no-touch chiropractor. She puts one hand over the other and goes, and makes a cracking sound in her own wrists while remaining about an inch away from the patient's skin. Sometimes instead of using their hands to adjust the atlas, they use a machine like this. It provides an impulse to a tiny spot at a precisely calculated angle. They call this atlas orthogonal. And there's another small, slowly growing category of reform chiropractors who reject the subluxation concept and try to provide evidence-based care. They limit their practice to short-term treatment of musculoskeletal problems. There aren't very many of them, and they're hard to find. They essentially operate as if they were physical therapists with special expertise in the back. It's hard to see how they can call what they're doing chiropractic. Chiropractors have lots of satisfied patients, and they do help people. Here's what chiropractors do well. They provide effective physical therapy for back pain, and they offer sympathy, explanations, and support. The doctor says, I don't know why your back hurts, here, try these pills. The chiropractor says, I know exactly why your back hurts, and I can fix it, and I can keep it from recurring. It's satisfying to have an explanation, even if that explanation is wrong. And he provides lots of personal attention, hands-on care, and wants to see you again soon, and your whole family too. For benign, self-limiting conditions, the chiropractor may keep the patient entertained long enough for the condition to resolve naturally, and that may keep them from trying surgery or other treatments that might have dangerous side effects. And they're good psychologists. They know how to please patients who are dissatisfied with their regular doctors. There is one treatment they use that is really effective. Spinal manipulation therapy has been proven to work for low back pain, but it isn't any more effective than other forms of treatment. In one study, it didn't work any better than just giving the patient a pamphlet about back care, but it may offer more rapid relief, and it's a reasonable option for patients who want to avoid pills. But there's nothing uniquely chiropractic about it. DOs, physical therapists, and some MDs use it too. If a chiropractor offers to provide spinal manipulation therapy for back pain, that's acceptable. But if he claims to be adjusting your spine to correct subluxations, that's not acceptable. Neck manipulation has been proven effective for neck pain, but it's no more effective than gentle mobilization, and neither manipulation nor mobilization will work unless they're combined with an exercise program. Chiropractic has many of the hallmarks of pseudoscience. It has its own journals and publishes studies, but they're of very low quality. They publish a lot of case reports and uncontrolled studies designed to impress readers that chiropractic works, not to find out if it works. Science makes progress. Chiropractic doesn't. Science rejects things that have been shown not to work. Chiropractic doesn't. They just keep adding more adjustment techniques, well over 100 now. They haven't tested them against each other to see if some are more effective than others. They just want to have the freedom to choose any treatment they want. This book is a travesty. Somatovisceral Aspects of Chiropractic. It's a textbook intended for use in schools of chiropractic. It's about treating disease in other parts of the body instead of just the spine. It claims that chiropractic can treat asthma, colic, ear infections, endocrine disorders, menstrual pain, and a host of other internal disorders. The subtitle claims it is an evidence-based approach. But I read this entire book and I didn't find anything in it that could be classified as evidence-based medicine or science-based medicine. Their concept of evidence is anecdotal reports, uncontrolled studies, and poorly designed studies that have never been replicated. If you still want to consult a chiropractor after hearing all this, here's how to choose a safe one. Look for one who rejects subluxation therapy, who doesn't take unnecessary x-rays, who doesn't use quack procedures or tests, who doesn't do preventive or maintenance adjustments, who doesn't promote unproven dietary supplements, who doesn't pretend to be a family doctor, who doesn't treat young children, who doesn't demonstrate antagonism to scientific medicine, who doesn't discourage immunizations, who limits his practice to short-term treatment of musculoskeletal problems, and who knows when to refer. The skeptical chiropractor Samuel Hamola used to tell his patients, I can't predict whether manipulation will help you, but let's try it for 3 treatments. If it's not helping at that point, we'll stop. Remember Lori Jean Mathiason's multiple treatments over 6 months? Don't you think she should have realized before that point that it wasn't working? Pick a chiropractor who's wearing the hat on the left. Trust me, I'm a scientist, rather than the one on the right. That shit crazy. I think I've made it clear that chiropractic is not science-based, but let me add a few horror stories. In a recent online forum, chiropractors were arguing about whether you could ever die if your spine were kept in perfect alignment. Some of them thought you couldn't die. Since everyone dies, I guess they thought that no one's spine is ever kept in perfect alignment. A chiropractor told me categorically that germs can't possibly cause disease because if they did, we'd all be dead. He has never had an immunization, and he claims that he can't catch anything because his spine is in alignment. Incidentally, he happens to be morbidly obese. Maybe all that fat is helping hold his spine in place. I met a chiropractor who diagnoses allergies by having the patient hold a sealed glass vial of allergen in one hand while he tests their muscle strength in the other arm. If their muscles seem weaker when they hold the vial, that proves to him that they're allergic to the vial's contents. He suspected one patient was allergic to something at work, and he didn't have a vial of Boeing, so he just had the patient think about Boeing, and that worked just as well. I heard that a child in my neighborhood had died of meningitis because he was treated with chiropractic adjustments instead of antibiotics. I asked if the family had sued the chiropractor, and I was told that they couldn't very well do that because the treating chiropractor was the child's own father. His false beliefs killed his own child. A friend of mine had a narrow escape. He had a backache that just wouldn't go away, and on a Friday afternoon he called a chiropractor and made an appointment for Monday. On Saturday his back pain stopped, and it never came back. Chiropractic must really be powerful if it works by just making an appointment. Remember the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy from Lecture 1. If he had seen the chiropractor on Friday and the pain went away the very next day, who do you think would have gotten the credit? He probably would have thought the chiropractor was a miracle worker and he would have kept seeing him forever. So, to summarize, chiropractic is a pre-scientific belief system. It's based on a myth, the subluxation. It has tried to establish scientific credibility for over a century and has failed. Sometimes chiropractors help people feel better, but they can also cause harm. When chiropractic does help, it's not really anything uniquely chiropractic that helps. If a chiropractor offers spinal manipulation therapy for short-term treatment of certain kinds of musculoskeletal pain, he might be able to help you. If he offers to adjust your subluxations or to treat problems elsewhere in the body, he's not to be trusted. In the next lecture, I'll talk about another cam that is highly overrated, acupuncture.
This is your Houston chiropractor, Dr. Gregory Johnson, and today we are going to be covering one of the most common disorders in our society today, away from the pelvis up to the occiput. Then we wrap this around the patient's occiput and chin, make sure their teeth's not in there, and do a straight vertical. Now let's come over and shoot you. We use a instrument, a high velocity, and then we're going to adjust his atlas.